Welcome back to my series on chess opening theory. In this video, I will be looking at the Knight F3 variation in the Winawer main line of the French defense. So the French defense is when we have the moves e4, e6, d4, d5, and the Winawer starts with the moves knight c3, bishop to b4. And the main line now occurs when white plays e5. White, of course, has other moves they can play, but e5 is very, very common. It is 10 times more common than the second most popular move. Ooh, there are many moves black can play here, but since this is kind of like an advanced variation, this is known as the Winawer advanced variation. I personally like the most common move, which is pawn to c5, striking at the center, putting some pressure on the d4 pawn. White now often plays pawn to a3, questioning black's bishop, asking what are black's intentions with this bishop. Black answers that question by playing bishop takes c3 with check. Black could play bishop to a5, that's a move as well, but I don't like that as much just because black probably wants to take the knight on c3, like it creates some interesting imbalances, and spending a move playing bishop to a5, in my opinion, is kind of a waste of tempo. It's a bit too non-committal, so I like all these imbalances that come from this trade. Anyway, after b takes c3, black has a number of moves here, but I just like knight to e7, which puts this knight on the only good square it can go to. It allows black to potentially castle kingside, and black is basically just waiting and seeing what's white going to do now, as white has a number of choices. So in the previous video, in this Winawer mainline tabia, like this position here is a very important position in the main line. It's a very important crossroads. In the previous video, we saw queen to g4, which is known as the poison pawn on variation of the Winawer main line. And in this video, we're going to look at knight to f3, which apparently is a move that the engine doesn't like, but it's a decent move. So previously, queen to g4, that was a very sharp line. I'm kind of a poison pawn, since black can sacrifice the g7 pawn and do some fun stuff. This line with knight to f3, it's a bit less crazy. It's a bit calmer, much more positional. The game often turns into more of a maneuvering game. And black has quite a few options here, quite a few choices, quite a few good moves. Like, there are arguments for many of them, but I personally just like the very simple idea of pawn to b6. Pawn to b6 does two things. One, it adds some defense to the c5 pawn, so if white takes it, black would have the option of taking back with the pawn. And two, it gets ready to trade this bishop on a6. Like, black would love to trade their light square bishop for two reasons. Reason number one is that this is a bad bishop. This bishop has trouble getting out. These these pawns on light squares, they are just in the way. This bishop has trouble participating in the game. So that's reason number two. Reason number one. Reason number two is that black has traded away their other bishop and has essentially given white the bishop pair. So the bishop pair can be very valuable in the endgame, and also the middle game too, but especially the endgame. And so one way to weaken an opponent's bishop pair is to just trade away one of the bishops. So bishop to a6 is a move that black would be very happy to play. It would kind of solve two problems. It would solve the problem of the bad bishop, and it would solve the problem of the bishop pair. So white, of course, does not want to allow this trade. So white has two main moves here. We're mainly going to be looking at one of them, which is the more challenging one in my opinion. Bishop to b5 check. This move essentially says no to the bishop trade. It essentially prevents black from doing it. Here, black probably does not want to play king f8. Black probably wants to still be able to castle, so black wants to block this check somehow. Now, the problem with blocking with this knight, the b knight, is that then the a6 square would no longer be available for the bishop to go to, and it would also be potentially maybe weakening maybe weakening the c6 square a bit, or at least tying this knight down to defending c6 square. So that's why defending with this knight is not so great. And defending with this knight is also not so great. This is not a good move either. Probably just turn on the engine just to show how serious the evaluation shifts. Like, white nearly has a winning advantage. It's like about plus 1.5, and plus 2 is just completely crushing as far as advantages go. Basically, the engine now proposes that white play h4, and one serious problem of blocking with this knight is that black's development kind of stinks. Black has kind of moved the same piece twice in the opening and really needs to move their other pieces. And so if black castles, white's attack will probably succeed. So white would probably play pawn to h4. Black can try for this trade. White could just kind of be like, yeah, okay, we'll trade, but on my terms. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Black has to move this knight again. Then we would have pawn to h5. And essentially, black has wasted way too much time by moving this knight around. And, like, basically, white has gotten very far ahead in their plan. Like, this is kind of like a very good version of the a4 line, like the a4 alternative, where white does allow the trade and stuff. Because black has essentially moved this knight around way too many times. But anyway, this is not what happened in the game, but just thought I should warn you, do not be tempted to block with this knight. Or even the b knight. Like, neither one of those moves is good. Instead, back in this position, what black should do is black should be like, okay, fine, we won't do the trade on a6. I'll just play the bishop to here, and at least I'll develop with tempo, because now, since white doesn't want to trade, white is going to be moving this bishop again. So in this position, bishop to e2 is perfectly playable. There are some ideas with playing bishop e2 just to avoid black playing pawn to c4 with tempo. But as we'll see in the game, black doesn't necessarily have to play pawn to c4, at least not right away. By far the more popular move is bishop to d3. And now in this position, black has to pay attention to what white wants to do now. And what white wants to do is play pawn to a4 and then develop this bishop to a3 with some nice pressure on the c5 pawn and maybe along this diagonal as well. Like, white's queenside pawns, they're a bit weak, but white would actually be fairly happy for c takes d4, c takes d4 to occur, because that would result in, these no longer being doubled pawns. This guy would now go to d4. So as a result, black should not allow this. Black should not allow white to play pawn to a4 and bishop to a3, because even though it looks like a4 pawn is hanging, like, the active pieces, the dark square bishop getting very strong is far more important. Like, rook pawns are less important than central pawns, and so they can often be tossed aside, especially since this rook would become active should white take the pawn if it went to a4 and the bishop went to a3. So as a result, the best move, in the engine's opinion, as well as many grandmasters' opinions, is to play bishop to a4. And now, here white often plays pawn to h4, and black often anticipates white's play on the king side. Like, white is also controlling the g5 square as well, so white might be trying to put a piece there as well. So it's very common for black to play pawn to h6, basically kind of preemptively, like, dealing with the idea of pawn to h5, pawn to h6, as well as stopping anything from coming to the g5 square. White often goes pawn to h5 anyway, and has this nice little bind with their pawns, like with these two friends over here. Like, this is a fairly favorable kingside pawn structure for white in the endgame, as it just kind of stops black's pawns from coming forward, stuff like that. But if black prepares it, black often can make a break on the king side. So in this position, there are a number of ideas for black. There are a number of ways of playing this position, but we are currently at like move 11, and with this series, I generally am not going to be going super heavy into theory. I'm generally stopping at move 10. That's kind of one of my philosophies with this, as move 10 is a very good place to stop if you're just getting into an opening, if you're just getting introduced to it. Like maybe in the future, I might go even deeper, maybe go to move 15, stuff like that. But I don't want to. I want to be encouraging the audience to understand what they're doing more than just memorizing a bunch of moves. But in this position, there are a number of ways that black can play. In fact, one very cool way that black could play would be to now play pawn to c4, and then after bishop to e2, play king to d7. And this is a very cool idea. Like one prominent game that features this is the game Georgiev-Yusupov 93. Like Anish Giri, he really likes this idea, but at the same time, he does not believe in it. He instead believes in playing, I think it was pawn to c4 and then knight to a6. But this is just a cool little idea. Like white can refute it. There is a refutation in the form. I think it's of playing pawn to g4, stuff like that. And many white players will not know it, or will not be able to find it at least. And so Grandmaster Giri, in his course on the French defense, he recommends playing like this in Blitz just because it's so fun. But he doesn't really recommend doing it in slow chess or classical chess. And I'm not going to go into Grandmaster Giri's actual recommendation, which is to play knight to a6 instead of king to d7. Like, if you want to see Grandmaster Giri stuff, I recommend getting his course. Of course, it's much cheaper to get it without video, but if you like, I recommend getting it without video, and if you like it, then getting it with video, stuff like that. But for our purposes, for our game, we're going to look at a different move, a different idea, because this game is very cool in terms of how black tried to play this position. So in the game, black played the move knight to d7 with just some very simple ideas, like kind of keeping the tension here with these pawns in the center. Sure, like black has not yet committed to playing pawn to c4 and locking everything down, and black just wants to castle queenside, like develop and castle, and then decide what to do. Probably break on the king side, as is often the case. It's like this whole middle game. It's very reminiscent of the a3 c4 middle game in the advanced variation, where often what black can do is lock everything down on the queen side, get the king to safety, and then at the right time make a break on the king side with either g6 or f6 or f5, stuff like that. So before continuing, I thought that I should now introduce the players who played this particular game. Knight d7 is a very rare move, but it's still very cool. With the white pieces, we have Grandmaster Sergei Dolmatov, and he is a Grandmaster from Russia and a former World Junior Chess Champion. And let's see, he won quite a few tournaments in the 80s and 90s. Let's see. Sadly, I'm always forgetting of the accomplishments of the players. Give me a moment. I want to make sure I say this correctly. One of those tournaments being, let's see, Hastings 89-90. The Hastings tournament used to be a very, very prominent round-robin tournament with a lot of historical value, many, like, going back to, like, 1895, stuff like that. And let's see. Oh, he's also a chess writer and trainer. But we're probably more interested in the player with black pieces. So with the black pieces, we have Grandmaster Predrag Nikolic. He is a Grandmaster from Bosnia, previously Yugoslavia, back when that country existed. He won the Yugoslav Championship multiple times, as well as many international tournaments throughout the 80s and 90s. So similar to White, they were both very active, very strong grandmasters. So Black even played in the Candidates Tournament in 1991, and he tied for first in the European Individual Chess Championship in 2004. Pretty impressive, given a career that spans multiple decades. So he's had a lot of success in team events, including the Olympiad and the European Team Chess Championship, winning medals multiple times, both team medals as well as individual medals. And even as recently as 2015, he won the World Senior Chess Championships over 50 section. So even many decades later, he's still got it. Very, very cool player. Very, very strong stuff. And this particular game was played at the GMA qualifier in Moscow during the year 1990. So if I remember things correctly, GMA was the Grandmasters Association, and that was a group that was formed by Garry Kasparov, sort of as an alternative to FIDE. Like, there was sort of this dispute between Kasparov and FIDE that resulted in there being like different world champions for a while. Like, FIDE would have their own world champion, the GMA would have their own world champion. And I think there might have even been some other group that had their own world champion. I don't remember. That's a video for another time. But anyway, more information about the players and the events can be found in the video description. We'll now get back to the game. So Black has played knight d7, developing the knights, introducing the possibility of playing knight takes c5 if White plays d takes c5. So White probably doesn't want to do that, as the c-pawns would be quite weak. And even though there might be opposite side castling, it might still be quite difficult for White to actually get at Black's king. So in this position, White now played the move... Oh, oops, I should scroll up a bit. I'm a bit silly. In this position, White now played the move castles kingside. The engine doesn't really like this. The engine thinks this is a little inaccurate. One little trick in this middle game, as well as in the a3-c4 middle game, is that very often it is correct for White to not castle kingside or to delay castling. Very often this rook is actually quite happy to sit on the h-file, because it can get into the game with like rook to h3, stuff like that. Whereas here on f1, this rook, it's a bit clunky. It's like, what is this rook doing? What is this rook going to do? Where's he going to go? It's a bit weird. Like, is he going to go to b1? But then what's the other rook going to do? Because this other rook has trouble getting into the game, Stuff like that. So that is why this move might be inaccurate. So anyway, Black now played queen to c7, getting ready to castle queenside. Alright, White now plays rook to e1, principled move, trying to justify the castling kingside, just putting the rook on a file that maybe will become open, but probably not. Black castles queenside. White now plays knight to h4, probably getting ready to try to play pawn to f4, stuff like that. But if that's the case, maybe the rook belongs on f1. But anyway, in this position, the engine, it doesn't actually hate knight to h4 itself. It more just wants White to play d takes c5. The engine really wants White to stop Black from closing things down. It really wants this first, and then probably knight to h4 and some other stuff. But the thing about this position is that even though the engine might think that this is fine, and like even though the engine might say, oh, this is about equal, this is very uncomfortable for a human to play. Like, a human is not going to like these weak pawns sitting here that are hard to push forward, hard to like break open the center and stuff like that. Like, hard to make weaknesses in Black's queenside. A human is not going to like this position. So even though an engine might be fine with it, a human is not. So I do not blame White for not playing d takes c5 and basically permanently having these doubled isolated pawns, as well as this isolated guy too. So, like, that's just very uncomfortable pawn structure. So anyway, in this position, black now played king to b7, which is a principled move, just getting the king to safety. The engine wants black to immediately just close everything down with pawn to c4, and then get to the king to safety, stuff like that. But I like doing this here. I think this is fine. We have rook to a2, queen to c6. Again, the engine is complaining. It's like, no, please play pawn to c4. We have queen to g4, hitting this pawn on g7. Black plays rook dg8, developing their rook and getting ready to try to make a break on the king side. We have rook to b2, kind of activating the rook in an interesting way. The engine again wants white to play pawn to c4. Kind of funny. I mean, like, that can be a tricky thing, like just figuring out the right timing for this move. We have pawn to g5, knight to f3. Like, white taking en passant is probably very risky because, this rook, he's got some nice targets on this file. So white probably should not be blasting that file open like that. So anyway, now black plays pawn to c4. Now black just locks everything down on the queen side because black recognizes that pretty much all of the play is going to happen on the king side now. And what's interesting in this position is I really like how black's playing, and because it's like black has a plan, whereas white does not. It's like, what are white's pieces doing? What is white trying to do? It's kind of unclear. Like, it's unclear how white should play this position, whereas with black, it's fairly clear. Black should try to play pawn to f5 at some point, or pawn to f6. Just try to blast things open here and attack. So we have bishop to f1. Bishop to e2 would block this rook. Like, one thing that black has to be mindful of is that if black does push this f-pawn, that the pawn on e6 will become weak. So that's why the bishop probably should not block the rook. Black plays rook to f8. The rook has done its job on g8. It doesn't need to be there anymore. This pawn is very well supported. It's the other pawn that needs support now. We have knight to h2, getting ready to reroute the knight. Rook to h7. Queen to h3. Queen to c8. Let's see. Pawn to f4. White's trying to do something. Like, white's play is very clumsy. It's unclear how white should be going about this, whereas black's play is not too hard to figure out. We have g takes f4, bishop takes f4, and now here comes pawn to f5. We have bishop to e2 as... let's see, I'm trying to remember. I think the reason for bishop to e2 is that the bishop is probably planning to come here to this diagonal where the king is and maybe hit this pawn or something like that, or maybe just defend this guy. One thing I should mention is that it does look like white can win a pawn here with pawn to f5 being played. It does look like we could have this, but black's actually completely fine with this. Like, if white plays queen takes e6, it's like, oh no, black lost a pawn, but black gets a very nice active bishop, and the knight will be jumping to e4, where it will also be very active. Like, material is not everything in chess. Like, that's one thing that I sometimes want to yell at Gotham Chess, because he'll often say that the most important things in a position are king safety and material. It's like, king safety, I agree with. King safety is number one, but very often, piece activity is more important than material. Very often, getting this bishop into the game and having it participate is more valuable than a pawn. Very often. So this position here would just be awesome for black. Like, black would just attack this king over here. Black would be very happy, and white's pieces would just kind of be pushed back. White would not be happy with this position. White would not be getting any value out of the extra pawn. Like, white's extra pawn would be one of these silly things on the queen side here. Actually, no, white's extra pawn will be the G pawn, but white really doesn't want to push that pawn. Anyway, this is not what happened in the game. Instead, we have bishop to e2, probably preparing bishop to f3. Black plays rook to g8, as the pawn, the f pawn, no longer needs support. It's very well supported already. Whereas the g file is some very nice food for this rook. This rook is very happy to have it. Rooks belong on open files, as they say. So we have king to h1, just getting the king off of this vulnerable file, breaking the pin on this pawn, even though the pin can't immediately be used for anything. It's more of just a prophylactic move, more of just a preemptive move, since white doesn't really have anything better to do, like maybe play bishop to f3, but not much other than that. And black now plays knight to b8, getting ready to just maneuver their knight into the game. The position is very, very closed, and that, as a result, that means that the players both have a lot of time to just move their pieces around to their best squares. There isn't a whole lot of urgency to do things immediately. So as a result, black has time to do this very long knight maneuver. So white plays knight to f1. White is maneuvering as well. We have knight b c6, knight to e3, knight to d8, queen to h4, playing for tricks. Basically, if black plays knight to f7, then this knight would be hanging. Black saw that, of course, and defended their knight. We have pawn to g4. We have queen to e8, potentially putting some pressure on the h5 pawn, stuff like that. Next, we have rook to f1, knight to f7, and now in this position we have bishop to h2. The engine prefers bishop to f3, and I do kind of like bishop to f3 since the bishop on f4 is doing some stuff, whereas the bishop on e2 isn't doing a whole lot. Like, one argument for bishop h2 is just that it does open the file for the rook, but it's like, can the rook actually do anything with that file? Is the rook even doing anything there? Whereas maybe the bishop on f4 could like take the knight on g5, stuff like that. That maybe white wants to do that, but that's anyway, that's not what happened in the game. Instead, we have bishop to h2. Knight now jumps to g5. It has completed its little pilgrimage. It has now arrived at its destination. We have gf5, knight f5, knight takes f5, e takes f5, rook takes f5, and now black tries to trade rooks because this rook is fairly passive on h7, and basically black would like to improve their pieces. Pieces get their stuff into the game. We have rook f4, and in this position, black played queen to e7, which is a little bit inaccurate. Basically, the move that black should have played is bishop to d7, and it's actually fairly obvious why. I don't mean to insult or criticize black, but basically, this bishop on a4, it's not doing a whole lot. It's putting some pressure on the c2 pawn, kind of keeping this rook occupied, but really, it could be doing much more. Like, this bishop up could be helping with the attack. It could maybe come to the e4 square, for example, be doing some fun stuff over there. So, basically, bishop on a4 is black's worst piece, essentially. Like, it's still a fairly good piece, but it can be better. Black should be improving their bishop. Instead, black played queen to e7. White played bishop to f3. We have knight takes f3. Queen takes e7 check. Rook takes e7. Rook takes f3. Rook to g5. And we now have an interesting endgame where there are opposite colored bishops. But opposite colored bishops are not necessarily a draw, especially when there are other pieces on the board. In particular, rooks. In fact, opposite colored bishops, they very often favor the attacking side, because the attacking side has a piece that can attack certain squares that the defending side has one less piece that can defend those kind of squares. So basically, if there are light square weaknesses or things to exploit in white's position that are on light squares, then white has one less piece that can defend those. So anyway, we now have bishop to g3, rook e g7. And like currently black is down. Is black down a pawn? Let's see, pawn count. I'm very bad at counting pawns, you know. Yes, black is down a pawn, but black has better pieces. Black's pieces are more active. Like the rook on b2 is very silly. It's just defending a pawn. And black will most likely be able to regain the pawn over here and have a nice passed h-pawn. So we have king g2. Black now improves their bishop with the move bishop to d7. White plays rook b1. Bishop to f5. Bishop is coming to e4. White has to react to that, otherwise white loses material. We have king to f2. Bishop to e4. Bishop is doing a good job of just blocking this file. Like generally in rook endgames, you want to put your rooks behind passed pawns. That goes for both the attacking side and the defending side. Like if you want to stop a passed pawn, it's generally easier to stop it from behind than from in front. And anyway, after bishop to e4, white has only one good square for their rook, because the bishop on g3 would drop. We have rook e3. Black now takes the pawn on h5. We have rook to f1. And here in this position, here black made a minor inaccuracy, which was playing rook h g5. What the engine wants black to do is play rook to f5 check and then trade away the rook on f1. And that is a common theme in rook endgames where you've got two rooks. It's often easier to win, like it's often easier on the attacking side to trade away one set of rooks, folks, because how to put it? It's harder to attack things when your opponent has like multiple rooks to defend with and all that. So, trading away one set of rooks makes it much easier to get into a situation where you have one active rook versus your opponent's passive rook. But instead, black played rook h g5. I'm putting pressure over here. Here, white has to react to this as things are getting very, very nasty. Like, basically black's going to push, like start pushing this pawn, force the bishop out of the way, and then start giving some nasty checks, you know, things like that. That's white is forced to be very passive here. So in this position, white now played a very cool move, which I think I quite like. The move was rook takes e4, sacrificing the exchange. However, this sacrifice is sound. Now, black did not accept the sacrifice. Black played rook takes g3. But if black had played d takes e4, then the game might have continued bishop to f4, rook to g2 check, king to e3, you know, going after this pawn, king to c6, king takes e4, or rook e2 check, king to f3, rook takes c2, and this endgame is probably a draw. It's probably going to be a draw because even though white is down in exchange, white does have these two connected passed pawns. So I would say this endgame is probably a draw. If we turn on the engine just says draw. The engine's just like 0-0 draw. Boring game, why are you wasting my time? That's how the engine is. Anyway, that's not what happened in the game. Instead, after rook takes e4, black did not accept the exchange sacrifice and give white connected passed pawns. Black instead just took white's bishop. And now we have the move rook to e2. What's interesting is the engine now wanted white to play rook to e3, which would trade the rooks. But rook e2 isn't necessarily losing. In fact, I'm not even sure if the engine's evaluations are correct. Like there's a moment later in the game where I'm actually a little bit suspicious of something that the engine says. So anyway, we have rook takes c3, rook to h1. Maybe part of the idea of rook e3 was just to stop the rook from eating all these pawns like this. We have rook takes a3, rook takes h6, king to c7, rook to d6, just stopping black's king from entering the game. I like this move. I like this idea. Rook to d7, and here I think the engine just kind of wanted whites to kind of repeat moves, or at the very least offer a repetition with the move rook to h6. Since this rook is very nice, whereas this rook is very silly, it doesn't really make sense to trade them in this case. Like, that's one thing that can be very difficult to figure out in chess, is when is a trade good, when is a trade bad. In this position, white now traded, but I do agree with the engine that just playing rook h6 would have been better. Just keep the king cut off, keep this rook passive. If the rook moves away from d7, then just put the rook back on d6, stuff like that. Anyway, we have this trade. We have king to e1, pawn to b5. Things are not looking so good. We have rook to h2, trying to cut off the king, similar to this. I'm not going to go too much into optimal play in this endgame. We have pawn to b4. Black is advancing their pawns on the queen side. Black has some very strong pawns here. Black can probably make connected pass pawns themselves. Rook to h6 check. Sorry, rook to h7 check. King e6. King d2. c3 check. King to d3. White has to be very mindful of potential b3, c2 ideas, like b3, pawn takes b3, pawn to c2. Like, white has to keep their eye on that possibility, especially with the rook going to a1, as that makes c1 equal queen an even scarier idea to have to deal with. Rook to h6 check, and now a move where I'm actually very skeptical of what the engine says here, since engines, they don't always necessarily understand endgames correctly. Not always. Sometimes they misunderstand them, or they miss something far into the future. So in this position, according to the engine, black should have played king to f7, but I'm not fully sure that that would have changed the results. Like, if you want, you can analyze this position and maybe leave something in the comments saying, actually, yeah, it would have changed the result because of all this, because of all that. Now, this is an interesting endgame position, but this series is not really about the endgame, so I'm going to kind of just gloss over certain things. So, black played king to f5. The engine does not like this move. We're going to soon see why. White played rook to f6 check. Good move. King to g5. Rook to f2. Just keep this king restricted. Keep him away from the game. I like this. This is a very good idea in rook endgames. Like, use your rook to cut your opponent's king out of the game and use your king to support your pawns. That's a very common theme in how to play rook endgames. We have rook to d1 check. Basically, black wants to force this king either away from, stuff over here, or at the very least away from this pawn on d4. And black does not want to go away from that stuff. We have pawn to a5. Black's pushing their pawns up the board. And white now realizes that they now need to do something. White plays pawn to e6. Black plays rook to e1 check. It looks kind of like white just sacrificed their pawn for no reason. That's pretty suspicious, don't you think? Anyway, we have king to d3. Interesting. I wonder why black didn't take that pawn. Rook to d1 check. King to e3. Oh, I see. Maybe black needed to gain time on the clock or something. Maybe there was an increment. I don't know. Rook to e1 check. King to d3. Rook takes e6. And oh, wow. Just everything in this position just looks completely hopeless. Oh no, the evaluation spoils it. Well, I'm going to leave it to the viewer right now. If you want, you can pause the video and try to figure out, how did this game end? Should white resign in this position? Like, you know, things just look kind of hopeless here. Like, black's got these very nasty pawns that are just gonna run up the board and promote. White's pieces are kind of tied up or shut out of the game. Like should white just resign here? What should white do? I will reveal the answer to this question in 3, 2, 1. So the final move of the game was a very cool move. Rook to f5 check. And black was probably aware of this. That's probably why there was some repetition stuff. This move, this idea is the reason why white threw away their pawn. Because if black takes the rook, it's stalemate. All of these squares are squares that white's king cannot go to. White's pawns are immobile. White only had one pawn that could move, and white got rid of it. And yeah, if black moves their king somewhere, then white can take this pawn and have their rook and king work together to deal with these pawns over here. And black is not in time to promote. So it's like there might even be some mad rook shenanigans that white can do, but I'm not going to go too far into the endgame here. Like, this is mainly an opening theory series, mainly about the ideas in the opening, but I hope that you enjoyed the game. Even though it was a draw, I think this game was very, very instructive, as black got a very nice position out of the opening and had a very good plan in the middle game and kind of just went a little bit wrong in the end game. I hope that you enjoy. I hope that you continue watching my videos. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Bye for now.